talk about diplomacy, it's usually interaction with sovereign governments, not with corporations. So I guess to start, if you could just lay out specifically what your role as an ambassador to Silicon Valley is and how you measure success.
Well, it's basically a recognition that the world today is not only about doing business with other countries or with international organizations. It's also about acknowledging that the big technology companies, some of them in the vicinity of where I'm sitting right now, but also in China, that they're becoming very influential actors to you and me as individuals, but also over international relations. So what I do and what my team is doing is more or less the same as embassies are doing all over the world. The only difference is that we deal primarily with the executives in some of the big tech companies and try and influence the direction that their companies are taking and their platforms are having on the world affairs.
I know this is a role that was carved out, I guess, about 2 years ago by Denmark. What has the reception been of tech companies to you in Silicon Valley and in terms of interaction? And how has that changed, especially lately, given the fact that we do see so much more scrutiny of the biggest companies?
You know, the honest answer to that question, it's been a mixed experience. Some of the companies have been very forward-leaning. They've recognized that it makes sense to have a multi-stakeholder approach where the companies are also talking to governments or to civil society. Then we've had, a lot of companies being curious and a little bit skeptical on, what is this about? Is this about regulation or is it about, commercial opportunities? But when we've had the opportunity to say that, this is a political function, it's about trying to find out how we work closer together and making sure that technology will not be undermining democracy, that it will not be threatening human rights, then they've been very forward-leaning. And then, to be very frank, we've also had a smaller group of companies that have been much more reluctant and to some extent trying to keep us far away from the headquarters. I think because of not particularly wanting to assume a responsibility over some of the technologies that they bring about. So it's been a mixed experience, but I think today we are in a very different spot than we were a couple of years ago. We have quite good relations with most of the tech companies, not only here in Silicon Valley, but also in China, in Europe, the Middle East, etc. And some of the scandals we've seen, Cambridge Analytica being one of the most prominent ones, never let a good crisis go to waste. It's been good to use those to get the dialogue going.
Casper, are you speaking for Denmark or are you speaking for Danish companies when you're out there in Silicon Valley? And what have you accomplished? What would you say is your top couple of accomplishments so far?
Yeah, no, I don't speak on behalf of Danish companies. This is a foreign ministry post, and I'm a career diplomat, and I came directly to this job from being bilateral ambassador to Indonesia. So it's a political function, and the kind of relationships and the kind of conversations we have with the big technology companies, that really depends on what Danish authorities wants us to bring forward. And that has to do with everything from terrorism, radicalization, illegal content on the big platforms to some of the issues we raised lately, the transcription of recordings on Siri and Google devices. So it is a traditional ambassadorial role where you basically represent the interest, the national interest, in my case, of Denmark. Now, that said, it goes without saying that we are a European Union member country, so we've also had a function to try and explain what is Europe doing, also on the regulatory front, and how does that relate to the technology industry here in the U.S.
That was my next question. I'm wondering, are you hearing any complaints in the Valley there that the EU is unfairly targeting U.S. big tech and somehow trying to subsidize their own innovation with our funds?
Oh, yes. I mean, if I'd received $1 every time we got a complaint about what Europe is doing, I would have been a very wealthy man, not a civil servant anymore. But what I would say is that I think, there's a lot of misconception, a lot of misunderstandings of what Europe is trying to do. And some of the companies have come forward to say, this is anti-American. We're just trying to target U.S. companies, for example, with this general data protection regulation, which stipulates that your personal data is your personal data that cannot be misused by third parties. So I think we've had an important role in also translating what is happening in Europe. But at the end of the day, and that is something which is essential to me and to Denmark, this is also about keeping together also across the Atlantic. We have companies here that are products of the same values as we have in Europe. We have to make sure that we collaborate also between the private sector and governments, because long term, there are some much bigger issues at stake, which is about whether technology will be used for surveillance, for control, for totalitarian approaches, or whether democracy will be defended also by the new platform. So the transatlantic issue is very close to what we do and what my team is doing.
Yeah.